My son once looked his kids straight in the eyes and said, "Don't listen to Grandpa. He's from a different time." He didn't say it jokingly or with a smirk or even with malice. He said it the way a man might warn his kids not to touch a hot stove. Calm, certain, matter of fact. And those words landed harder than he could have imagined. I sat there at the table, a fork in my hand, my plate half full, and I couldn't bring myself to say a word. The room seemed to shrink, the chatter of dishes and the smell of dinner suddenly muted by the pounding in my ears. It was such a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of a verdict. My son had just dismissed my entire life, my values, my stories, my beliefs, as nothing more than outdated relics that didn't belong in the world his children were inheriting. I wanted to speak. God, I wanted to. 1,000 words crowded the back of my throat. Defenses, explanations, stories that proved there was still wisdom in what I had lived through. I wanted to tell him that being from a different time doesn't mean being wrong. It means having perspective. It means having seen storms and survived them. But I didn't. I sat there and chewed slowly, pretending it didn't hurt, while inside it felt like my heart had cracked. The kids didn't know what to do with his words. My grandson shrugged, too young to fully understand. But my granddaughter, her face fell in a way I'll never forget. Just minutes before, she had been leaning forward eagerly, her eyes wide as I told a story about when her grandmother and I were young, about how we had built a life together with more love than money. She had been hanging on every word, soaking it in like sunshine. And then, with one sentence, her father dimmed that light. She glanced at me, uncertain, as if silently asking, "Is he right? Should I stop listening to you?" That look cut me deeper than my son's words ever could, because it wasn't just about me. It was about what she might start to believe about herself. If her father could so easily dismiss me, then maybe he could dismiss her dreams too. Maybe she'd start thinking that imagination and curiosity, the very things that drew her to my stories, were nothing but foolish distractions in a world that demanded practicality. So I kept my mouth shut. My silence filled the room heavier than any argument could have. My son carried on with the conversation as if nothing had happened, talking about grades, about preparing for the future, about the importance of real skills. He spoke with the authority of a man who believed he was protecting his children from the harshness of the world. And maybe, in his own way, he thought he was. But from where I sat, all I saw was the spark in my granddaughter's eyes flicker, and I hated myself for letting it happen. That night, after everyone left, I sat in my chair with the house quiet again, the echo of his words replaying in my head. He's from a different time. I thought about how many times I had heard variations of that phrase before. At work, in public, from neighbors who rolled their eyes when I shared an opinion they didn't like. But hearing it from my own son, in front of my grandchildren, was something else entirely. It felt like erasure, like being told I had already outlived my usefulness. I told myself I didn't argue because I didn't want to widen the rift between us. I told myself I stayed silent for the sake of peace. But the truth was uglier. I stayed silent because I was afraid. Afraid that speaking up would push him further away. Afraid that standing my ground would make him see me not as a father, but as an obstacle. So I swallowed my pride, and in doing so I swallowed a piece of myself too. But what I didn't realize then was that my silence wasn't just mine to carry. My granddaughter noticed it. She saw the way I lowered my eyes, the way I let her father's words hang unchallenged. And though she didn't say anything at the time, she carried that moment with her quietly until the weight of it grew too heavy for her small shoulders. A few days later, she came to me with tears streaming down her face. She told me her father had brushed off her dream of becoming a writer, told her it was unrealistic, told her stories don't put food on the table. She looked at me, her voice trembling, and asked, "Grandpa, am I really foolish for wanting to write?" In that moment, I understood the cost of my silence. The words I had held back at the dinner table now pressed forward with urgency, because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about her, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I couldn't stay quiet. What I did next changed her life forever. But it also broke my son. After that dinner, when my son told his kids not to listen to me, the house felt different. The walls seemed to echo with silence in a way that hadn't happened before. It's funny how a home can be filled with memories, laughter, the smell of old wood and photographs on the walls, and yet one sentence, just a handful of words, can make it feel hollow. I sat there in my chair after they left, the television humming in the background, but my mind was far away. Retirement wasn't something I feared. When I stepped out of the classroom for the last time after 35 years of teaching history, I thought I was ready. I imagined myself finally having time to garden, to read, to maybe even write down some of the stories I had collected over a lifetime. My wife, Diane, had passed 10 years earlier, and I thought those quiet hours might be a way to still feel her presence. She loved words. She used to tell me that stories were the only way we keep people alive long after they're gone. So I surrounded myself with them. Photo albums, her journals, my books. They kept me company. What I didn't anticipate was how much I'd crave the company of my family. My son, Michael, was always busy. He'd call when he remembered, drop by on weekends when his schedule allowed. Most of the time I was just grateful for the sound of children's footsteps racing across my living room, for the way Emily would curl up beside me with wide eyes, ready for a story. Michael and I had never been close the way fathers and sons are in movies. He respected me enough, I suppose, but somewhere along the way he decided that the way I lived my life was outdated. I was a man of books, of patience, of long conversations that stretched into the night. He was a man of deadlines, numbers, and efficiency. He once told me, "Dad, you waste too much time thinking. The world moves too fast for that." I laughed when he said it. But later, alone, I wondered if maybe that was why he thought I had nothing left to offer. And yet, there was a time when I saw the same spark in him that I now saw in Emily. When he was a boy, Michael would sit with Diane and me in the evenings, his head resting on her shoulder as I read aloud. He loved knights and battles, stories of bravery and sacrifice. I thought those moments would stay with him forever. But as he grew older, the world got louder, and the boy who once dreamed of being a writer or an explorer decided those things weren't practical. He traded his imagination for a briefcase and a schedule. And in his mind, he was doing the right thing. Providing, building, surviving. That's why the dinner table comment cut so deeply. It wasn't just about me. It was about everything Diane and I had poured into him. Everything I thought he had once loved. In dismissing me, he dismissed the very things that had once given him joy. And worse, he dismissed them in front of his children. Emily noticed. She always noticed. That night, when she caught my eye after his words, I saw the question written all over her face. She wanted to know if her father was right. Should she stop listening to me? Should she bury her curiosity, her hunger for stories, the way her father had buried his? When I finally went to bed that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the old clock tick on the wall. I thought about Diane, about what she would say if she were still here. I imagined her voice, gentle but firm. "Don't let him silence you, Bill. And don't let him silence her either." That was the kind of woman she was. She always believed in the power of words, the power of encouragement. She lifted me through the darkest times, and I could feel her urging me to do the same for Emily. The next morning, I shuffled into the kitchen and brewed my coffee, but the silence was unbearable. Every corner of the house reminded me of what I hadn't said. The framed wedding photo on the mantel, the stack of journals Diane left behind, the old typewriter collecting dust in the study. All of it whispered the same thing. If I didn't speak up soon, I would lose more than just my son's respect. I would lose the chance to pass on something irreplaceable to my granddaughter. I didn't know how it would happen. I didn't know when. But as I sipped that bitter coffee, I made a quiet promise to myself. The next time Emily came to me with questions, I would not stay silent. I would not let Michael's practicality crush the spirit I saw shining in her. I had no idea that moment would come sooner than I expected, or that it would come with tears streaming down her face. It was a Thursday afternoon when I heard the knock. 3 short taps, hesitant, like someone wasn't sure they should be there. When I opened the door, Emily stood on the porch, her backpack hanging off one shoulder, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't need to ask what was wrong. The tears on her face told me more than words could. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let her in, my chest tightening. She dropped her bag by the door and sat down on the couch, pulling her knees to her chest the way she used to when she was much younger. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, and I didn't push her. I just sat in my old chair across from her, waiting, letting her know she didn't need to rush. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking. "Dad says I'm being silly. He says writing is useless. He told me to stop wasting time with it and focus on something that will actually matter when I'm older." She sniffled, wiping her sleeve across her face. "He says stories don't pay bills." Hearing those words, I felt something deep in me stir, a mix of anger, sadness, and recognition. I knew that tone. It was the same one Michael had used with me at that dinner table, dismissive and absolute. He wasn't just shutting her down, he was planting seeds of doubt that could stay with her forever. Emily looked up at me, her big eyes glistening with tears. "Grandpa, am I really foolish for wanting to write?" That question cut me deeper than anything else. Because I remembered being young and hearing similar things myself. Teachers telling me I was wasting my time on stories. Friends saying I should be more practical. The difference was, I had Diane. She always believed in me. She pushed me to keep reading, to keep dreaming, to keep speaking my mind. Without her encouragement, I don't know what kind of man I would have become. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on my knees. "Emily," I said softly, "listen to me. You are not foolish. Wanting to write, wanting to tell stories, that's one of the bravest things a person can do. Do you know why?" She shook her head, silent. "Because stories are how we remember who we are. They're how we make sense of the world, how we pass down what we've learned. Your grandmother used to write in her journals every day. She never published a single word. But those pages, they're treasures. They carried me through my darkest days. Words have power, Emily. Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." Her lips trembled, and for the first time since she walked in, she gave me a small smile. But underneath it I could still see the doubt. That's what her father's words had done. They had burrowed deep, casting shadows where light should have been. I wanted to protect her from that. I wanted to give her the same gift Diane had given me, belief. Belief that her dreams mattered, even if they weren't practical or profitable. But I also knew Michael. If he found out I was encouraging her against his wishes, The fragile peace between us would shatter. I could almost hear his voice already. "Dad, you're undermining me. Dad, you're filling her head with nonsense." The choice weighed heavy on me. Do I stay quiet, as I had at the dinner table, and let Emily's spirit wither? Or do I speak, risk my son's anger, and give my granddaughter the encouragement she desperately needed? I looked at her then, really looked at her. Her small hands clutching the sleeves of her sweater, her shoulders hunched under the weight of her father's disapproval. The way she was searching my face for an answer, for something to hold on to. And in that moment I realized silence was no longer an option. Still, doubt gnawed at me. If I stepped in, I would be crossing a line I had avoided for years. Michael already thought I was outdated, irrelevant. What would happen if I openly defied him by telling his daughter he was wrong? Would he cut me off? Would I lose the little time I still had with my grandchildren? But then Emily whispered almost too quietly to hear, "I just want someone to believe in me." Those words broke me. They stripped away every hesitation, every fear, and left me with only the truth. This wasn't about me and Michael anymore. This was about her. I reached out and took her hand. "I believe in you," I said, steady and firm. "No matter what anyone else says, I believe in you." Her tears returned, but this time they weren't only from sadness. They carried relief, too. She squeezed my hand, and in that moment I knew the path I had chosen. But I also knew the storm it would bring. That night, after Emily left, I sat at my desk staring at my wife's old journals stacked neatly in the corner. The leather covers were worn, the pages yellowed with age, but I could almost hear Diane's voice in them, whispering encouragement. She had always been the one who believed in me when no one else did, the one who told me that words weren't just words, they were lifelines. I thought about Emily, her small hand gripping mine as she begged, "I just want someone to believe in me." Those words wouldn't leave my mind. They echoed through the quiet house long after the lights were off, louder than the ticking of the clock, louder than the creak of the old floorboards. I realized then that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't make the same mistake I had at that dinner table. Silence had cost me too much already, and if I kept it up, I'd lose something even more precious: Emily's trust. So the next day I made a decision. I would give her something no one else could. I would give her the belief her father had taken away. I went into the study, a room I hadn't really touched since Diane passed. Dust covered the shelves, and the typewriter she had given me as a gift sat quietly under its case. I lifted it with trembling hands, feeling the weight of it, both literal and symbolic. That typewriter had seen decades of half-finished drafts, essays, and letters. I hadn't used it in years, but I knew it was exactly what Emily needed, something tangible, something real. That afternoon, when Emily came by again, she had started visiting me more often, finding excuses to stop by after school. I led her into the study. She looked around wide-eyed, taking in the shelves, the stacks of books, the dusty journals. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice almost reverent. "This," I said, brushing dust off the old desk, "is where stories live." I pulled the typewriter forward and set it on the desk. "And it's yours now." Her eyes widened. "Mine?" "Yes," I said firmly. "This typewriter belonged to your grandmother and me. We spent hours here, writing, reading, sharing words. If you want to write, then write here. Let this room be your space. Don't ever let anyone tell you it's a waste of time." She touched the keys gently, as if afraid the machine might break under her fingers. Then she smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen on her face since before that awful dinner. "Can I really?" she asked. "You can," I said, and you will. Every time you feel like giving up, I want you to come here and remember that I believe in you. That was the turning point. From that moment on, we made it our ritual. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, she would come to my house, sit in that study, and write. At first, just little stories. Tales about her dog, about her favorite books, about the adventures she dreamed of having. But slowly, they grew. She began writing about her feelings, about her fears, about the way her father's words made her feel small. And every time she finished a page, she would hand it to me, and I would read it with care, offering encouragement, never criticism. "You have a gift," I told her once after reading a short story about a girl who found a secret garden. "You make people see things with your words." "That's not silly, that's power." She beamed, her cheeks red with pride, and I knew then that what I was doing mattered. But there was always a shadow hanging over us. I knew Michael would eventually find out. I knew he wouldn't approve of what I was doing, of the time Emily was spending here, of the encouragement I was giving her. He saw writing as frivolous, and if he knew I was nurturing it, he'd see it as defiance. Still, I couldn't stop. Every smile Emily gave me, every new page she proudly slid across the desk, every sparkle of hope I saw returning to her eyes, it was worth it. I kept telling myself that maybe Michael wouldn't notice, or maybe, if he did, he'd see the good it was doing for his daughter and soften. But deep down, I knew better. I knew the day would come when he discovered what we had built together in that study, and when it did, there would be a reckoning. Until then, though, I poured everything I had into Emily. My time, my encouragement, my stories, and my belief. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose again. I wasn't just an old man from a different time. I was a grandfather helping his granddaughter find her voice. And that decision, that choice to break my silence and step into her world would change everything. It happened on a Friday evening in the school auditorium. The walls were decorated with colorful posters that read, "Young Authors Contest," and the stage was lined with folding chairs where children sat nervously, waiting for their names to be called. I sat in the audience, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my heart pounding harder than it had in years. Emily had entered one of her stories, the one about the girl who discovered a secret garden where her fears turned into flowers. She had written it in my study, tapping away on the old typewriter until her fingers ached. I had read every draft, watched her shape the story with patience and determination. When she told me she wanted to submit it to the contest, I encouraged her, even though a part of me worried what would happen if Michael found out. And, of course, Michael did find out. He was sitting 2 rows ahead of me with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He hadn't said a word to me when we arrived, hadn't even acknowledged I was there, but the tension radiating from him was unmistakable. He knew, and worse, he knew I had helped. When the announcer called Emily's name, my heart leapt. She walked across the stage with her hair neatly brushed and her story clutched in her hands. Her voice trembled at first, but as she read, she grew stronger, her words flowing into the microphone and filling the room. I watched as parents leaned forward, listening intently, some even smiling at the vivid imagery she created. By the time she finished, the auditorium erupted into applause. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Emily stepped forward, clutching her certificate, and when the teacher asked her who had inspired her to write, she didn't hesitate. She turned, scanned the crowd, and said clearly, "My grandpa." He believed in me when no one else did. The room erupted again in cheers, but I didn't hear them. All I heard was the sound of my son's pride shattering like glass. He turned his head slowly toward me, his eyes burning with anger. It wasn't just anger, it was betrayal. After the ceremony, while families gathered to congratulate their children, Michael marched straight toward me. His steps were heavy, his shoulders squared, his face red. Emily was still smiling, bouncing on her feet, showing off her certificate, but Michael's voice cut through the joy like a blade. "Dad," he snapped, his tone low but furious, "we need to talk." Now he pulled me aside, his grip firm on my arm. "What the hell were you thinking?" he hissed. "You went behind my back. You encouraged this nonsense after I told her to stop. Do you realize what you've done?" I stood my ground, though my knees trembled. "I gave her hope," I said evenly. "I gave her belief. Something you tried to take away from her." His eyes narrowed. "Belief doesn't pay bills. Belief doesn't put food on the table. You're filling her head with fantasies that will crush her when the real world hits. I told you to stay out of it." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. And I told her the truth. "Stories matter, Michael. Words matter. You've forgotten that. You've forgotten what it feels like to dream." His voice rose, sharp enough that people began to glance our way. "Don't you dare lecture me. I'm her father. It's my job to prepare her for reality, not coddle her with fairy tales." "Prepared for reality?" I shot back, my own voice louder now. "By crushing her spirit? By teaching her that dreams don't matter? You think that's protecting her? That's not protection, Michael. That's fear. And I won't stand by and watch you take away the very thing that makes her who she is." The silence that followed was thick and unbearable. Emily, who had wandered closer, heard enough to understand. She looked between us, her little chest rising and falling with quick breaths, tears welling in her eyes. Michael saw her face and turned away, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. He didn't say another word to me that night. He just gathered his kids and walked out, his hand heavy on Emily's shoulder, his steps quick and angry. I stayed behind in the auditorium, the applause still echoing in my ears, the certificate clutched proudly in Emily's hand replaying in my mind. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was the weight of what had just broken. I had given Emily the belief she needed, but in doing so, I had driven a wedge deeper into my relationship with my son. I had crossed the line I had been avoiding for years, and there would be no going back. That night, lying awake in bed, I realized the truth. I had saved my granddaughter's spirit, but I had shattered my son's pride. And the cost of that choice was only beginning to reveal itself. The days after the contest felt heavy, as if the air itself carried the weight of what had happened. My phone didn't ring. There were no weekend visits, no sound of little feet rushing through my living room, no questions from Emily about the old photo albums or the stories tucked away in Diane's journals. For years I had grown used to silence, but this silence was different. This silence wasn't born from age or routine. It was punishment. Michael didn't speak to me for weeks. I had expected his anger, but the absence of contact cut deeper than I imagined. Every morning I found myself staring at the phone, half hoping, half dreading that his name would appear on the screen. It never did. When I walked past the study and saw the typewriter, I would hear the echo of Emily's laughter, her voice reading her stories aloud. But now the chair sat empty, and I wondered if I had done the right thing. Yet, even as doubt gnawed at me, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Emily. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, but unmistakably hers. She wrote about how proud she had felt on that stage, how scared she had been to speak, and how strong she felt knowing I believed in her. She ended with words that made my chest ache. "Thank you for giving me my voice back, Grandpa." I won't stop writing no matter what. I sat in my chair holding that letter, tears blurring the ink. For the first time since the contest, I felt peace. I had made the right choice. Whatever came between my son and me, Emily's spirit had been preserved. She had found her voice, and that mattered more than anything. Still, the cost was steep. When Michael finally came by weeks later, it wasn't to talk. He stood on the porch, his arms crossed, his expression cold. Emily and Jake stayed in the car, their faces pressed to the window. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just said, flatly, "We need some space. Don't encourage her anymore." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong again, but I saw the steel in his eyes and knew he wasn't ready. So I nodded, though my heart broke in the process. He turned and walked away, and I felt the distance between us stretch wider than it ever had before. In the weeks that followed, Emily still found ways to reach me. Letters tucked in the mailbox, notes slipped under my door when she walked home from school with friends. Once, she left a story folded neatly on the porch swing, weighted down by a smooth stone. Her words grew stronger with each page, filled with imagination and courage. And every time I read one, I whispered to the empty room, "I believe in you," hoping somehow she could hear me. I began to realize that what had broken between my son and me might never fully heal. Pride is a stubborn thing, and Michael's pride was wounded deeply. I had undermined him in front of his children, in front of an entire auditorium, and though my intentions were pure, the damage was done. He saw my actions as betrayal, not love. But when I weighed the cost, I found no regret. Because every generation has a choice, to pass down fear or to pass down belief. Fear tells a child to stop dreaming. Belief tells them to keep going, even when the world tells them otherwise. I had chosen belief. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the porch with Diane's journals in my lap. The stars scatter across the sky, and the cicadas hum in the background. I picture Emily sitting beside me, her notebook open, scribbling away under the porch light. In those moments, I feel Diane close again, as if she is whispering, "You did the right thing, Bill. You saved her." I know one day Emily will grow older, and she'll face 1,000 more voices telling her she can't, but she'll also carry the memory of her grandfather who told her she could. And maybe, when she has children of her own, she'll remember that lesson and pass it on, the way Diane once passed it to me. As for Michael, I hold on to hope. Maybe time will soften him. Maybe one day he'll look at his daughter and realize that her strength didn't come from rejection, but from encouragement. And maybe then, he'll forgive me for choosing her spirit over his pride. Until that day, I sit quietly in this house, surrounded by the stories of the past and the stories Emily is still writing for the future. I am from a different time, yes, but belief, love, and hope, they are timeless. And if I had to choose again, I'd do the same, because saving her light was worth the cost of losing his. So that's my story. A story about silence, about words that wound, and about the choice to either let someone's light go out or to fan it back into a flame. I don't know what the future holds for my son and me. Maybe time will heal what's been broken, maybe it won't. But what I do know is this: my granddaughter will never again question whether her voice matters. She knows it does. And for me, that's enough. If you've ever felt dismissed, if someone has ever told you your dreams don't matter, I want you to remember Emily's story. Remember that the world will always have voices that try to quiet you, but all it takes is one person to say, "I believe in you," to change everything. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had someone tell you that your dreams were foolish? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. I'll be reading them, and I know others will too. If this story touched you, please take a second to give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need encouragement, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to me, and it helps keep these stories alive. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are never too old, never too young, and never too out of time to believe in the power of your own story.